Our organization is focused on providing a holistic approach to this issue. There's not one solution to it. Healthcare, we look at financial literacy, we look at digital literacy, providing assistive devices. The idea is to ensure that all elders are able to live an active, healthy, and a dignified life. Don't be scared to take that path just because somebody else is saying that it's not. What is the right way of doing things?
We're climbing a ladder. It's against the wall that we found or someone else told us or our parents told us. And we're like, wait, we got to the top. We're like, this is not my wall. I need to come back down, move it to another wall, and that's the wall I want to climb.
People make assumptions about what it is like to be you. That it's easy because you're in a given situation, or it's hard for you because it's in a given situation. Dinesh, you are from Guyana, yeah?
Yes, I was born in Guyana and lived there for long enough to have a Guyanese accent.
Really? So when did you come here to the States?
So me, physically, I moved in 1990, February 1990, but our family took about 5 years to make the shift. We started moving in 85.
You had, your experience of growing up wasn't fully American, and it wasn't really fully Guyanese either, right?
Yeah, definitely. Till the age of 12, I was in Guyana, and then starting from February 1990, when I was just about 12 years old, bam, it was in Florida.
Yeah. It's so unique to hear people's stories of how they grew up and then what other people think of them based on, how they look or how they sound. People make these assumptions that, I would, if I didn't know you, I would have assumed that you were born here somewhere and grew up here just like I did and, had all the same experiences or similar experiences.
That's because I've gotten rid of my accent. When I moved here, I used to call the thing with roots outside and the thing that comes after two tree. I call them both tree. But it's not just different countries. I actually know someone in DC that I grew up, or not, I work with sometimes, who grew up in a family with a different culture that never had exposure to cartoons like the Jetsons or Scooby Doo or things like that. So when they, as an adult and as a working professional, someone would make a comment like, Mickey Mouse or Peter Pan, they had no idea what they were talking about. And I think those differences are sometimes greater than we estimate.
That's why I'm so excited to have today's guest on the show. We have Dr. Swati Nigam. Swati, welcome.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you, Dinesh. Thanks so much for having me.
We're so glad.
Yeah. Swati, I am excited that you're here because, listeners, Swati and I have had a connection for about 5 years now-ish.
Oh, wow.
Back going to, we were connected through a nonprofit organization called Pratham. And I got to know Swati there. But, Swati, what always really just left my heart singing was every time you and I would talk, it was incredible how your experiences are just so unique in some ways and yet so similar. Even though you grew up in India and you've been here now for 10 years, I grew up here in the States. Both of us are dentists, but even that whole experience looked so different. So I'm just really excited to kind of bring in the fold for listeners different insights and maybe help us rethink the story that we tell ourselves when we're living life and making decisions and all the wonderful things that you have to say. I don't want to spoil it, but welcome to the show.
Thank you, Seema. I'm excited, and as you correctly said, that it was such a pleasure not only to work with you professionally, but personally, have those conversations and see the overlap in the experiences and perceptions, as well as the differences. And Dinesh, to your point earlier about Mickey Mouse and Jetson, I still don't understand football jokes here. I did not grow up here. So there are a lot of times where I'm sitting, I'm like, I have no clue, but I'll be smiling. I'm like, yeah, sure, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I love that. No, thanks for sharing. So we can read your bio, we can see your LinkedIn, and we know all the stuff you're doing professionally. But our listeners at the Happy and Human podcast are very sophisticated and they demand a lot more. So tell us something about you that most people probably wouldn't know from just encountering you in a professional workplace. We want to get to know the real Swati Nigam, not who your education is, not what you do for a living, uh, the real you and who you're becoming. Like, where are you going, as opposed to where you've been?
That's I'm going to try my best to answer that question, but Dinesh, for that I'll have to give a little bit of context to that journey that I am taking right now. But as Seema mentioned, I grew up in India. I grew up like in a regular middle class family, and my family was primarily made up of like doctors and armed forces people. So I came from a family who had that thing that of making sure that we do something in life. Uh, but it was always like, hey, we are a middle class family, like a regular one, focus on studies. But yet we had a history of overachievers in the family. Hey, so and so got that award. So and so was given that facilitation or etc. Whatever. So from the beginning, it was always for the lack of better word, confusion as a kid. Like, am I a middle class person, trying to do well in studies and making a life, or am I trying to match up to the achievements that have been done by people before me? And I think much to the confusion of my family, I was always a very different person. And when I say different, it was not different from any other perspective, but I loved sports. I was doing very well in sports. I was in my school team and went on to my college team, etc. I used to love reading. I used to write a lot. I used to participate in debates a lot. Being surrounded by people who did really good in their studies, they were not very sure how that's going to help me make a life out of it. So,
Hmm.
it was always a thing about, you're doing that. I'll give you a very small example. I don't know how many people know this, but there's a movie that came, I don't know, another lifetime ago called Bend It Like Beckham. And
Yeah.
it was about it was somewhat similar to what I was going through in my life, that oh my god, and I was playing a game called cricket, which was like girls never played that in India, and I was doing
Yeah.
very well in that. But I remember somebody calling me and saying, hey, it's an excellent movie. Don't get ideas from it, but watch it. It's an excellent movie. So, it that was my growing up years, where trying to figure out where do I fit in. So that was always a confusion, but going to where I am right now, what my personal journey has been, I realized because of all those experiences that for the longest time I followed the path that was laid out in front of me, but I realized that still it didn't lead to where I was happy as a person. I was still struggling, I was still answering, like the goalposts were moving still, even if I was on that path. At one point, I realized that let me give it a shot, let me try doing something which is going to be different and actually follow
Hmm.
through with it. My first step in that direction was doing my public health when nobody even knew what public health was. There were only two institutes in India who offered public health. I didn't tell people at home that I'm giving the entrance exam for that. But when I
Hmm.
got through, I thankfully got an admission in that. And I was graduating as a dentist at that time, talking about, doing my master's, and, I had my life set. Moving to that aspect of my life where I decided I want to take a risk. I want to see where it leads to, what comes out
Hmm.
of it. That was, I think, for me, a personal journey which I'm trying to continue every day. That I realized that yes, it was an uphill task. I did something which was against, like, nobody still understands what I do in India or in my circle. But I always look back and be like, it's a journey I decided to take. It's a risk I took. So I've moved in that direction. That's the journey. That's the path I try and keep taking. That does it make sense to me? Is it something that I want to continue doing? And yeah, I make mistakes, but that's what I'm trying to do.
I want to ask you a question from a real practical standpoint, right? Um, I Most of the people that I know believe and would echo some of the same advice that you just gave. Like the path that's set out in front of you may not be your path. You've got to do what's right for you. You have one life. Seize the day. C'est la vie. YOLO. Whatever it's called, right? It's this concept of you live one life. Um, don't worry about what other people think. Don't be scared to take risks. Do what you feel like doing, right? And I think a lot of people agree and believe that. But still, I feel that, we're still talking about it and we're still sharing the same advice that is, centuries old or decades old. What do you think stops people in the first place, and that leads to them, that is a prerequisite to them realizing that they need to take a risk, they need to find a new path, the one that resonates with them, and make sure that, if you think about a ladder, it's leaning against the right wall. Many times we're climbing a ladder, it's against the wall that we found or someone else told us or our parents told us. And we're like, wait, we got to the top. We're like, this is not my wall. I need to come back down, move it to another wall, and that's the wall I want to climb, right? What would you say to people from the beginning? And I'm wondering if almost as a parent or as a mentor or someone, we say to people like, hey, the path that you're going to be told, it doesn't have to be the path you follow. Like, it's a good place to start, but you should figure out where you need to go. What would you say to someone who's, sort of heard this advice but is dismissing it and not ready to act on it?
I think, Dinesh, I was on that path. I was leaning against that wall for the longest time. But I think for anybody who's doing it and still thinking about leaning on another wall, I think the primary reason that we have to accept, at least that's what I did, was I wanted to be liked by everybody. I wanted to be
Hmm.
like, I don't want it to be that family conversation of being the odd person, or in my friends being like that odd person who's like, what? I didn't want to be in that awkward situation. And it's that
Yeah.
awkwardness is what I feel sometimes leads people to be like, take the safe path. Don't take the
Yeah.
risk, which will cause people to ask you questions which you may not be able to explain to them, because that's something that you have landed up on because of your journey, your experiences. And you don't want that attention on yourself. And that awkwardness or that discomfort is something that even kept me on my path for the longest time of my life. Anybody who's thinking about it or listening to this conversation, you're absolutely right. Everybody talks about it. I think from within us, we all know as individuals what is it from that path that we want to derive. But are we comfortable enough to be that awkward, or the
Mm.
have that uncomfortable conversation with people about why we are
Yeah.
doing it?
Yeah. Because belonging is so important to us, right? Like, we want to be part of the tribe, we want to be part of the group. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And, we're not ice cream. Even ice cream, 3% of the people on the planet don't like ice cream. Yeah, even ice cream can't be liked by everyone.
Yeah, and to your point, I have friends who don't like ice cream, but they're very awkward about even mentioning it in a larger group because they're like, we don't want to be that person who says that I don't like ice cream. It's a simple thing like that. And this is our human tendency. Like, if we have that notion, or that idea that by saying that we don't like ice cream and invite those questions, I think
Hmm.
it's a journey to take about bigger things in life. And
Hmm.
I want to quote a thing about Brené Brown. I'm a big fan. I don't know if you guys have heard of her or not, but
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, yes.
she says that true belonging doesn't require to change who you are. It's basically, it requires you to be who you are. That's when you'll
Hmm.
actually truly belong,
Mhm.
not only in
Yeah,
relationships and situations, everywhere.
I agree.
Yeah, it's so imperative, especially, for someone like you. You have, done something initially that everybody understands, right? Oh, I know what a dentist is. I know what that means to go to the dentist or have a toothache. But then you went and you shifted and you did your MPH, right? Your master's in public health. And even in this country, it's a little bit more clear, but still that could really mean anything. And then to shift again into doing what you do now in various roles of nonprofit work. I mean, most people, when you think of becoming a high achieving person, it's not nonprofit, right? It does that. It almost like it just doesn't make sense. But yet you, as I've watched you sort of go through life and take on different roles, I've watched you become even more authentic and even more unapologetic and even more comfortable with who you are and why you're showing up in the way that you are. And it's almost like you've created your own little belonging circle bubble, if you will, that you just take with you to every little conversation. And you can't help, as someone walking up to you, to want to
To
be
be
inside
inside
the
the
bubble,
bubble,
right?
right?
I want to be in that bubble where you feel comfortable enough to be who you are and you feel like you belong. It's beautiful.
Seema, I think you're absolutely right that But the journey was not like a straight path. And, I think you're saying that I have come to that point where I have now started accepting how everything is or who I am and being unapologetic about it. But I still feel that I'm apologizing way more for a lot of things that may not require that. It's interesting you saying that, like I can still remember the time when I decided to pursue my MPH, and the notion there was that, what? What is that? Like, what exactly do you do in that? And
Hmm.
secondly, the second notion was this, that, oh, you might not be good in studies, or you have some kind of an issues because of which you're leaving a dentistry path to pursue something which is like this. Over years, like I had that journey, then I had a journey about, I remember when I moved to the country and I was like starting from scratch. I was doing very well professionally in India, but I was starting from scratch. And literally, when I started, I worked in a public library part time because I had to start somewhere and I was not getting my foot in. And I remember the first time I had a conversation with somebody, one person was like, "Oh my God, are you crazy? You're a dentist. You've done this in life. Are you going to go and work in part time in a library?" And the other person said, "Hey, it's a journey. You will learn stuff. You will grow from here. Don't be scared to take that path just because somebody else is saying that it's not what is the right way of doing things."
Hmm.
And that time also, I was, in that path where I was like, I don't think it's making any sense. I don't think it's the right thing. Then I moved to the nonprofit sector where I primarily was doing fundraising. I still have people come up to me and be like, "You're a dentist, you did public health, you got into nonprofit, and now you're what, asking people for money? Like, what are you doing with your life?" The
Hmm.
definition of, or the point that you want to say that I came to this point of where I've created that bubble, I think people do that, one, trying to safeguard themselves, which I have. I know for a fact that I have come to that point where I'm like, I have to save myself from these kind of things, not let them affect me. And
Yeah.
then also the second thing is this, that it's a journey, it's a process of learning as a human being, that the goalposts will keep moving, things will keep happening. At the end of the day, you're answerable to yourself.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, however, though, is so common, right? And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're in a place of life where you're beginning or starting or established. You could be at the very, very top of the world and just choose to do something else, and people will have an opinion. I think that is commonplace and accepted. You know who Michael Jordan is, right? I know you're not into sports. You know who Michael Jordan is, but when he played baseball, the headlines were like, "What's he doing? He's got such a illustrious basketball career. Why is he being an embarrassment to himself playing baseball for a couple of years?" And so I think a lot of times the takeaway is not try to fight against those comments or things like that, but to recognize that we will, just as we can't expect everyone to know what our reasons are, we also shouldn't try to justify or find valid reasons for them. And we can't expect them to understand, or we can't expect ourselves to understand what reasons they have for questioning our decision and things like that.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a way to get to peace where the opinions can exist in a way that isn't determinative of how we interpret them or we feel about them or things like that, right? I mean, if you
Mhm.
think about it,
Mhm.
the sun, right? We all have the sun shining over us. The sun will, we have lots of articles out there. The sun will cause skin cancer. The sun will burn you. You should protect ourselves. And so the the answer isn't to destroy the sun or to hide from the sun. The answer is for us to learn how to live with the sun, right? And to also learn how to live with the understanding that people just won't understand our reasons.
Yeah. And it's funny because we often try to give the answer that we think is what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And so we're just taking stabs in the dark, right? Maybe this reason will be good enough and I won't have to answer any more questions. But oftentimes we're not even correct in our attempts. to fill that knowledge gap or whatever else. And in truth, maybe nothing we say is ever going to actually suffice for the other person, right? Swati, you said this so beautifully, is just, does this make sense to me? Does this feel good to me? I think it's pretty brave of you to have gone off and applied for a spot basically in for continuing education and not even really tell anybody about it. You know, for good reason, at least you had at the time. It's admirable, because I think so many of us would take such a big life step and look for, do I have mom's approval? Do I have dad's approval? Do I have, you know, Paya's approval or whoever else, right? Somebody needs to tell me that this is safe and okay. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, I think all three of us have found this to be true, is that next step that makes sense for us, it's not going to make sense to anybody else. So
you're right, Seema. I mentioned this on the conversation, this book from Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, like What Happened to You? It's a very interesting book because I think at that point I didn't know as a youngster why I was making the decisions what I was making, or why suddenly I had the capacity to take the risk that I had. But it's a very interesting way of looking at it, that, you know, your experiences, your journey, your people around you shape the person you are. So in a situation, if the same situation is presented to all three of us, we will react in very different ways, all three of us. Now looking back, it seems like, oh my God, you know, I made that decision and it was a huge risk. I knew it was a huge risk, but we also have to realize I did not tell anybody. I did not, when I was applying for that job, because I knew that I will not be able to explain why I'm making that decision. So for everybody, that journey of making that decision is influenced by how they landed up there. And for me at that point, to take that risk, I believe as a youngster, one, maybe I was a little naive, but also I was like, I have to do this. I will not be able to be true to myself if I don't do this. And I think that's the journey that a lot of people still around me also, as you know, Seema, that I work with a lot of women who are restarting their career here in the US, and even graduates from my alma mater. They're like, is it worth taking that risk? Is it worth getting those questions answered by people? Is it, I'm not going to get that support, but I really want to do it. So the point is, you can continue on that path. But at the end of the day, you'll always have that thing of, why didn't I do it? Why didn't I show up for that decision? And always live in those two aspects of life.
That's a common theme that I see a lot. And you know, I think you answer it beautifully. I also try to help people understand that, you know, when we're asking that question of is it worth it, we're to make it very you know, mathematical. We're making a calculation that, am I going to be rewarded more than my effort that I exerted, right? Is it going to be worth it? Like when I go to the gym at 7 o'clock in the morning, am I going to get enough back to make it worth my time and my sacrifice, right? But here's the thing, we're bad forecasters. We just have to accept we're terrible at understanding what our efforts and what our risks and what our, where we put our focus and energy, the benefits that will come, because oftentimes we're only evaluating on one narrow sliver of what the perceived benefit is. And the benefits come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, and forms and time. It's to the level where you almost miss the benefits, to be honest, right? And so one of the questions, something directly related, is, you know, is the podcast worth it for you? Like, what are you getting out of it? Is it helping your law firm? Is it helping this? Why are you doing the podcast? And, you know, there's a lot of answers, but one easy one is, if it wasn't for the podcast, and we wouldn't have had one of our prior guests on, Tejal Patel, shout out to Tejal. And if it wasn't for that, my son and her kids would not have had a great time a couple of weeks ago in Kansas City, right? Now, I don't know if that turns into a lifelong friendship, right? I don't know if they end up being roommates in college, or there's a day where my son needs some help when he's 25 years old and they're working at the same time. I have no idea. But if it wasn't for that effort, maybe that would have never come by. And it's too easy to write that off as serendipity, as coincidence, things like that. But we oftentimes do that. Another common theme is that, you know, well, we can't do everything. Why should we even try? And my answer to that is, okay, you may not have the most intelligent kid on the planet, But that's not a reason not to have children, right? And so we stop ourselves from even doing 4 things because we tell ourselves we can't do everything. So why even do 4? Why even do 5 things? I'll never be Mozart. So why should I even learn an instrument? And you can see how we stop ourselves short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For many of our listeners, we kind of have explored coming from different parts of the world. We have listeners from all over. But I'm really curious to get a glimpse into what it's like for you because, we were talking before the show and people make assumptions as the brain does, right? It makes sense that the brain will try to make assumptions and make sense of things. But based on how you look, based on how you sound, based on where you're living, or maybe your job title, or even what you do for fun, people make assumptions about what it is like to be you. That it's easy because you're in a given situation, or it's hard for you because it's in a given situation. I know for me, I've experienced not feeling that sense of belonging in groups where there are other Indians, there are other South Asians, but they don't sound like me, right? And they're at the same time having the same thoughts. She doesn't sound like us. She's not really, how Indian could she possibly be, right? Tell us your experience, because you're kind of in a no man's land here.
Yes, I moved to this country like 10 years back. At the beginning, I was like, maybe because I'm new, I don't understand. And gradually I learned how to fit in, to understand, to make sense out of the jokes or cultural references that maybe because I'm new, I'm not able to make that. But it's 10 years down the line, Seema, and now I'm in that phase where when I go to India, I have conversations where they're like, oh, you've been out of the country for 10 years, you may not understand this aspect because this is what has changed, or this is what we think about. While I'm here in this country, and when I'm in a part of a group, even if it's Indian group and people who've grown up here, they have references to things which I didn't grow up with. I don't understand it. And I'm kind of like, as you correctly said, like in a no man's land where I struggle with the part about where do I fit in, the struggle of trying to make myself a little attuned to what is happening here, as well as not lose my roots there. And in all of this, there are a lot of times where I'm like, who am I actually? Who am I in terms of whether it is the second generation or the first generation friends that I have made here, or the people who I've grown up with as kids, but who I haven't like been as closely associated with for the last 10 years since I moved out of the country. That is something that has been a very constant struggle. Initially, it was always like, I'm going to learn this, I'm going to understand this. Of course, it's going to be there. But as you grow, as you become an adult, as you grow professionally, when you walk into a room, I'll give you an example. There was a time when I walked in as a part of an organization. I was the only brown person in the room. And before the official meeting started, there was a whole lot of people were chit-chatting, catching up, etc. I had no idea what the reference was because there was a lot of local related discussion and jokes and stuff that were being discussed. And it was a very small thing, but for me, and I was going to present, but the terror that came into me that anything that I say right now, will it even land the way it is supposed to land? Just because I realized I don't fit into that room in terms of thought process. People were wonderful. They were really kind. They were really nice. But a simple thing like we were coming from two different worlds and we did not understand each other's language. Those are instances that I still feel. It's not only about from where I am. I still get a lot of questions from a lot of people saying, hey, you're an executive director for a nonprofit. Aren't you too young to be that? How did you become an executive director at this age? Is that something that you knew somebody because of which you landed up in this job? Your background, your age, all of these things always as you walk into a room, and especially being a woman, that we've discussed this multiple times. There are a lot of preconceived notions that you have to always fight your battles against.
My question would be, where did you land? What does it mean for you to be South Asian in this country, Indian in this country?
I'm still answering that question. I still feel that I don't know if I've landed in that aspect. I still struggle every day. I'm going to have one of those days where I'm going to walk into a meeting and be like, oh, I fit in. I understand all the jokes. I understand everything. And then I'm going to walk into another meeting or meet up with a friend or somebody like that. And I'll be like, I still don't understand it. I still don't know where am I in all of this situation. My perception of that is that nobody really feels that, hey, I've landed 100%. I fit into this 100%. Now it's all good. This is what exactly it's supposed to be. Now I understand the language here, the emotions, even the jokes, or whatever it is. I have had people who I've known who are like in late 70s who came here 1980s or 60s or 70s. They still sometimes they're like, we still don't understand that. We've been in this country for 40, 50 years, but we still don't understand that. The short answer is I still don't think that I've landed as a South Asian woman or as an immigrant.
I think that's true for a lot of us, right? I think whether it's a cultural identity, a life stage identity, or a career identity, I think for a lot of us, we're not quite sure where we fall. And for people of our demographic, I think the biggest place where we're not sure is, are we a child or a parent? Because as we are parenting our children, our parents need a lot of guidance now, and that's a very difficult identity to assume when you're in a place where you're making decisions for parents and are sometimes that are not lining up with what they're stating as what they want, but you're trying to think what's best for them. A lot of times many of us are not sure what role are we really playing.
As I heard somewhere, it's called the sandwich generation. I think every generation calls them the sandwich generation, but now I think with my age group or all of our age group, we are now, at least I am identifying as a sandwich age group of, being the caretaker on both sides. As you correctly said, the dilemma of identification of which in every aspect of your life, how you're tackling it, where you're finding your identity or where you're still trying to figure out, do I still fit in? Going back to the earlier discussion, I think that is also what causes people not to take the risks, not to be that odd one out, because it'll cause more questions. We're already struggling with our identity and it'll cause more questions.
I really want people to understand we're talking about aging and parents, and which kind of brings us to where you are now. You mentioned you're the executive director for a nonprofit. I would love for you to kind of share about, HelpAge India, and you said it was called the American Friends of the HelpAge India, right?
Yeah.
Just a quick sort of what I know about this program is that there's 38 million elders living in India today, and 90% of them are underserved, meaning that they don't quite have a place to go, if you will. Tell the listeners about what it is that you're doing for HelpAge, the programs that they run, the impact that they're having.
I'm working currently as the executive director for American Friends of HelpAge India, which is basically the US affiliate of an organization called HelpAge India. And HelpAge India has been in India for almost 48 years now. They started in 1978. It's since then that the need to look into and cater to the elders in India was realized. You correctly said 90% of the elders are from the unorganized sector or don't have access to the basics. I mean, the stats are mind-boggling. We are talking about 138 right now, but by 2050, we are expecting 340 million elders in a country which doesn't have a social security system. It's growing, it's gradually building up. But, imagine like 50% of them living below poverty line. 20% of them have no income source. So they're relying on their family, their friends, their relatives, and which in turn is leading to more than 27% facing some form of abuse. It is from within the family, from outside the family. It can be financial, physical, mental, etc. And the biggest thing that, I think we also face here is that, the loneliness, the isolation. So we are talking about people in India who are growing old, not being able to catch up to the technology that we have now. And they're saying that 75 years and older, almost 26% of them are going to be living alone and not knowing how to connect digitally. Imagine the kind of isolation that they're looking at. Our organization is primarily focused on providing a holistic approach to this issue. There's not one solution to it. So we're looking at healthcare, we look at financial literacy, we look at digital literacy, we look at providing assistive devices. The idea is this to ensure that all elders are able to live an active, healthy, and a dignified life. One example of a recent conversation I had with an elder when I was visiting India in one of our programs outside of Hyderabad. There's this lady, 86, 87 years old lady, and she had a very long story about the struggles, the challenges that she faced. But she became part of our program, of our self-help group, and then amongst everything else, so these self-help group people basically become financially independent by learning how to do small businesses. And part of that group, one of the things that they do is they have their own savings within the group. During the conversation, I said, okay, what has changed, what is new, and how all of these savings are creating a difference in your life. And that lady basically turned around and said, speaking on behalf of the whole group, she said, now we have an educational saving account. I was like, what does that mean at 86 years old? They're like, oh, a lot of our kids are daily wage workers, and sometimes if they lose jobs, their kids have to leave school. So we use that saving to provide for their fee or college supplies, etc. Then there are other things. Two things which struck me were, one was ration saving. That was anybody in the group falls ill, they'll ask the neighbor to help them because everybody is living alone, they've been abandoned, or they don't have family close by. But they will give the neighbor, they will buy the food supplies for the neighbor, who will then cook and provide the person who's sick, so that there is no obligation that hey, we pulled from our own family's food supply to feed you. And the most mind blowing thing for me was they said we have a death fund. I was like, what the heck is a death fund? They basically said that, it was after a lot of years through all of this, we were able to live a dignified life and we were not turning to people for basics like food, home, etc. We were given the respect, the dignity that we hoped we would have continued till the death. And so now that we have a saving, we have created this death fund so that any member of our group that passes away, we will pay for the funeral services because we don't want them to feel the pressure of relying on their family to pay for their funeral. We want to make sure that each member of our group, when they pass on, they go with dignity that they had throughout their lives. They are not looking at anybody. That's the work, that's the kind of change that we are trying to do in India. The organization is looking and working with people who may be older, but as we call it, they're older but not over. They still have a life, they still have an identity. That's about the organization. Thank you for letting me share about that.
It's such a beautiful organization, and I honestly didn't hear about it until you and I had coffee a few months ago, and I thought it was just so remarkable. All the wonderful things that that HelpAge is doing, because you would never know. It's not something that you think about. You hear about education, you hear about women's rights, you hear about all of these other things. This is so interesting that it's such a prevalent problem, and yet it's not something that I think most people think about. We're just so glad that you had the time to talk with us about it today. Mm-hmm. Dinesh and I have specific questions that we want to ask of you, and we'll ping pong back and forth.
So Swati, we live in a world where we want some immediate effects and some benefits from what we do. And so to give the listener something that they can implement right away in their lives, it doesn't have to be related to what we talked about, but from your experience, tell us one thing that without a doubt, that if we implement right away today, our life is going to change for the better.
The one thing, Dinesh, which may sound like a very big thing, but trust me, even a small step in that direction, I feel makes us more complete, more true to the people around us, is that just try and take a risk or a step of being true to yourself. It can be a small thing like choosing the restaurant that you want to go to. It can be as small as that. Doing one thing every day that makes you feel that I did that for myself, so that makes us a more complete, more true, happy person to be around. I think just starting from there, I feel that we can bring about smaller changes that will grow us as a human being.
I like that a lot.
There's a whole Big Bang Theory episode on how one of the characters is trying to figure out how to do this with his wife, and it's like if he's just struggling in his own personal hell of telling her where he wants to order in from that night. And it's just so comical how we get in our own way, right? We oftentimes just give away our ability to even say where we want to go eat, or whether we want to go eat out or stay in. So I love that you're talking about a really small, simple step that could be really powerful.
Yeah.
So we also have a tradition called Ask It Forward. A guest previous to you has left a question for you, not knowing who you were, what your topic was going to be, or when we were going to record. They just asked a question and you get to answer that question, Swati. But then the flip side is you get to do the same and ask a question forward for the next guest. This question is from Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya, otherwise known as Dr. B. He's a leading psychiatrist, and is the founder of the Empathy Clinic in Canada. And his question to you is, what are you going to do to listen better?
Gosh, I think to listen better, just first thing, be in the moment. We talk about not having biases, not having perceptions, not having this thing, but I feel that are we even in the moment? Are we even listening to what the thought or the question or what it is? So before I can work on my bias or my perception or why that person asked that question, am I even listening to the whole thing? Am I even listening to the whole question? In any conversation, giving my 100% of attention to that conversation, not being on my phone, not thinking about my grocery list, not being anything else, but just listening to that.
I love it. I can imagine worlds changing simply because people were doing the listening instead of being on their phones. So then, with that being said, what would you ask of the next guest?
I would be very curious to know from a guest that one experience or a realization that the guest may have never shared or rarely shared that they feel has been valuable for them to navigate their journey as an individual, as a profession, but something that they haven't spoken about or shared a lot. What is it that they feel that if they're comfortable sharing, what it has been for them?
Maybe like a less spoken about aspect of their journey that was actually quite critical to them getting to where they are.
That's a good question. Yeah, I like that. And listeners, take some time and answer the questions for yourself. They'll bring some awareness and realization, as I just did in my head, but the answer is just too embarrassing to share. So we'll leave you in suspense. So Swati, thank you so much. One way that Seema and I like to thank our guests is by giving you the opportunity to share organization or a cause that's important to you. And that way we can raise awareness of that organization and cause, and we can also make a contribution on behalf of you to that organization.
No, thank you, Dinesh. That's very, very generous and kind of you and Seema to spread awareness of causes through this medium. I'm very passionate about elders, so I would definitely say American Friends of HelpAge India, not because only of my association with them, but as I've become part of this organization. The kind of challenges the elders are facing, just because the perception is this, that they've lived their life. Why do we need to pay attention to them? By all means, I'm not saying that the causes for youngsters or mothers or food is not important, but just because the person is already crossed those things or has lived their journey the way they have, doesn't mean they don't have life left. We're not in an age where the average age is 50 years or so. Now we're talking about average age going up. So we have a whole life. The 60 is the new 30, as we call it. So just because they've crossed that new 30 or 60 doesn't mean that they don't deserve the opportunity to live the life that they want. So American Friends of HelpAge India is what I would say the listeners to go and just hear about, read about, and any elder in your family or in your circle, just go out and have a coffee with them. That also is a big thing.
We were talking with Selena Shah about this very thing. I know she's connected with you as well with Desi Daughters, and I love that you both are doing work in this sphere. Swati, I know you are doing incredible things, voted one of Austin's top 50 women leaders, but where can the listeners connect with you more if they want to learn more about HelpAge or about what you do?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Or LinkedIn is the only medium that I'm usually the most active on. Otherwise, via email. I'll be very happy to connect with people to answer not only questions about work, but anything that regarding taking risks and stepping out of the box.